The dig the beer was lukewarm, the kind of dewy arm that coats your throat like oil. I took another pull from the can, not tasting it, just feeling the fizz die on my tongue. The backyard barbecue was in full swing. The annual Labor Day get-together at Dave's place. Smoke from the grill hung in the heavy air, mixing with the smell of cheap chiche charcoal and cheaper cologne. Dave, my old high school buddy, was manning the grill, flipping burgers with a spatula that had seen better decades. He looked over at me, his face shiny with sweat. "Mike, lighten up. Man, it's a pierrot, grab another drink." Setting the half-empty can on the plastic patio table, my eyes weren't on the grill. They were on the gate leading from the driveway. It swung open, and he walked in. Chris. 2 years since I'd seen that smug son. He looked the same. Maybe a little more gray at the temples, but still wearing those expensive khakis that never quite fit right. Still wearing that air of someone who thought he was doing you a favor by breathing the same air. He didn't see me at first. He saw Dave, waved, and started walking over, slapping backs, shaking hands. A few heads turned. A low murmur went through the small crowd. People remembered. They always remembered. Then his eyes landed on me. He stopped mid-step. His smile didn't falter. It just changed, got tighter, more predatory. He sauntered over, his boots scuffing the concrete. He said, drawing out the name like it was a punchline. He looked me up and down, taking in the faded jeans, the stained t-shirt from the auto shop, the empty space beside me where a wife used to stand. "Well, didn't think you'd still be coming to these things. Still alone, Lau." He actually chuckled, a dry papery sound. He reached out, not to shake my hand, but to clap me on the shoulder. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at him. Dave shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. "Chris, maybe not the time. Relax," Chris said, not taking his eyes off me. "Just catching up. How's the house, Mike? Still in that dump on Elm? Or did the bank finally kick you out after the, you know?" He made a vague gesture with his hand, mimicking a falling house of cars. 2 years. Chris had been my best friend. We'd served together in the National Guard, done plumbing side jobs on weekends, watched each other's kids grow up. He'd introduced me to Ra. He'd been the best man at our wedding, and 6 months before the divorce, he'd rotted helping her out, running errands, fixing our, listening to her, problems, with me, problems he'd helped manufacture. He'd fed her lies about my drinking, exaggerating a beer after work into a full-blown habit, and my finances, making my refill budgeting look like reckless gambling. He'd turned my wife against me, then walked away clean when she filed for divorce, leaving me with the house, the debt, and a hollowed-out life. "Still got that smug mouth, I see," I said. My voice was flat, no anger, just a statement of fact. Chris laughed again. "Just calling it like I see it, buddy. Some guys just aren't cut out for the ride life. You were always too rigid. Ra needed someone who could keep up, someone with a little more ambition." He let the word hang there, dripping with implication. Dave cleared his throat. The burgers were burning. Chris glanced back at the grill, then at me. "Anyway, good seeing you, Mike. Try not to drink all the cheap stuff, yeah? Save some for the rest of us." He gave me that clap on the shoulder this time, a pathetic excuse for a friendly gesture, and walked off to join the others, already deep in conversation with a couple of guys near the COO. I picked up my beer can, crushed it in my fist, and dropped it into the overflowing trash bin. My hand was steady, my heart wasn't pounding. I felt nothing, which was new 2 years ago. Seeing him would have sent me into a blind rage. Now nothing, just a cold clarity. I walked over to the edge of the patio, leaning against the fence. From here, I could see the whole yard. Chris was holding court, gesturing wildly, probably telling some bullshit story about a big deal he'd closed. He was a realtor, had been for 10 years, but everyone knew he barely scraped by. His success was a front, paid for by credit cards and his second wife's nursing salary. But he'd won. He'd taken my marriage, and left me with nothing but a reputation as the guy whose best friend stole his wife. And now he was laughing about it. Still alone, I watched him for a long moment. Then I pushed off the fence and walked toward the grill. Dave looked relieved when I approached, thinking I was there for food. "I wasn't," I said, keeping my voice low. "Who else knows Chris is here?" Dave wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Just us, man. I didn't invite him. He just showed up, like he always does. Figured it'd be less drama to let him stay than start a scene." "Less drama," I repeated. "Right." I looked past Dave at Chris. He caught my eye and raised his can in a mock toast. I didn't respond. I turned back to Dave. "You remember that property on Cedar Street? The old Miller place?" Dave frowned. "The foreclosure, yeah. What about it?" "I own it," I said. Dave blinked. You do? Since when? Since 2 months after the divorce was final, I said. Bought it cash at auction. Chris tried to bid on it, but he couldn't get his financing straight. I did under an LLC he never knew. Dave's mouth opened, then closed. He looked from me to Chris, then back. Holy shit, Mike, you never said. Didn't need to, I said. Until now. Chris thinks he's the big shot. Thinks he's got the Mime Rocket cornered on real estate, but that property, it's the key to everything. The access road, the water rights, the zoning variance, it's all tied to that parcel. Without it, the new development he's been bragging about, the one on the adjacent lots, is dead in the water. No easement, no permits, no sale. Dave stared at me, his burger forgotten. You're shitting me. I'm not, I said, and I've kept quiet for 2 years, letting him build his little empire on sand. But today he decided to laugh in my face. So now, he gets to learn what it feels like to have the ground disappear beneath his feet. I turned and walked away from the grill, away from the pier, away from Chris's laughter. I didn't look back. I got into my truck, the engine rumbling to life. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Chris still holding court, still smiling, still oblivious. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. As I hit the main road, I dialed a number on my Bluetooth. It rang once, yeah. A gruff voice answered. It was Frank, my look, the same one who'd set up the LLC for the said AR Street property. I said, it's Mike. Chris showed up today at the barbecue. Laughed in my face. I'm done waiting. Then Frank chuckled. About time, kid. What's the play? I want the cease and desist drafted tonight, I said, for the easement. And I want the zoning board meeting moved up, tomorrow morning. First thing. I want him served at his office, while he's bragging to his clients about his big development. Make sure it's loud. Make sure they all hear it. Consider it done, Frank said. And Mike, about time you stopped being the victim and started being the owner. I hung up. I looked in the mirror again. The barbecue was a speck in the distance. Chris was still there, laughing, but not for long. The ground was about to shift, and I'd be the only one standing when it settled. Still alone, I muttered to the empty cab. We'll see about that, Chris. We'll see about that. I drove home to the house on Elm. The one Chris thought was a dump. It wasn't a dump. Paid for. Free and clear. And tomorrow it wouldn't just be mine. It'd be the cornerstone of something Chris couldn't touch. I parked the truck, got out, and stood in the driveway. The evening air was cool, the stars just beginning to show. I looked toward the horizon, toward the direction of Cedar Street, toward the future I'd been building in silence. Chris wanted a laugh. I'd give him one, but it wouldn't be at my expense. It'd be at his, and it would echo for a long, long time. Teach Sierv. The next morning broke gray and damp. I was up at 500 am, same as every weekday. Made coffee black, no cigar. Stood by the kitchen window, watching the streetlights flicker off. My routine hadn't changed in 2 years, except for the absence of Essa Ra's footsteps upstairs, and the silence where her radio used to hum. At 7:30 am I got the text from Frank. Served at 8:02 am. 14 witnesses, priceless reaction. I didn't reply. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and headed to the garage. My truck started with a low growl. I drove the familiar route to the industrial park on the edge of town where Chris had his real estate office. Elite Properties. The sign proclaimed, though the paint was peeling and half the letters were missing. I parked across the street, killing the engine, watched. At exact, Chris's silver Mercedes pulled into the lot. Rocking in his reserved spot, he got out, adjusting a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He looked sharp, confident, oblivious. 2 minutes later, a nondescript sedan pulled up behind him. A man in a cheap suit, one of Frank's process servers, got out, a thick envelope in hand. He walked up to Chris just as he was unlocking the door to his office. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see it. Chris turning, his smile freezing. The server holding out the envelope. Chris shaking his head, backing up a step. The server stepping forward, persistent. Then Chris snatching the envelope, ripping it open, scanning the first page. His face went from confusion to shock to a sickly shade of green. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing across the street, right at my truck. Our eyes met. Even through the tinted glass, I felt the impact. It was like a physical blow. His mouth opened, then closed. He took a step toward the street, then stopped, realizing how it would look. He spun back to the server, jabbing a finger, his body language screaming rage. The server just held up a hand, turned, and walked back to his car. Chris stood there, clutching the papers, his chest heaving. He looked down at them again, then back at my truck. I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't smile. I just sat there, letting him soak in the reality of the situation. After a minute, he stormed into his office, slamming the door so the windows rattled. I waited another 5 minutes, then rotted the truck and drove away. I didn't need to see more. The message had been delivered. My phone rang at 9:15 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, same number. I answered on the third ring, putting it on speaker as I merged onto the highway. What? I said. Mike, it's Chris. His voice was strained, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. What the hell is this? This cease and desist this easement bullshit. It's not bullshit, Chris, I said. My tone was flat, devoid of emotion. It's a legal document, read it carefully. Page 3, paragraph 4. That property on said R Street, I own it. Half for 2 years. And your precious development. The one you've been bragging about to every client you have. It sits on landlocked PLs, no legal access without crossing mine. And I'm not granting it. Not now. Not ever. Silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. Come on, man, we can talk about this. This is business, you don't have to. I don't have to do anything, I cut in. That's the point, Chris. For 2 years, you did whatever you wanted, ruined my marriage, stole my wife, turned my friends against me, and I stayed silent, because I was grieving, because I was trying to pick up the pieces. But yesterday you decided to laugh, to rub my face in it still alone. Lol, remember that? That was your mistake. Mike, I was just joking, you know how I am. I didn't mean, you meant it, I said. You meant every word. And now, you're going to live with the consequences. Your development is dead. Your contract's irrevoidable due to impossibility of performance. Your investors going to sue you into the ground. And the best there's not a damn thing you can do about it, because I own the key, and I'm not turning it. I hung up. He called back immediately. I ignored it. He called 3 more times, then nothing. I spent the morning at the auto shop, tuning a transmission, losing myself in the rhythm of the work. The phone stayed silent at noon. I answered. Jesus, Mike, Dave said, his voice low. Chris is losing his mind. He's at the office, screaming at everyone. Says you've ruined him. Says you've been planning this for years. Is it? About the property. It's true, I said. Every word. Dave was quiet for a beat. That's cold, but I get it. After what he did, still, this is gonna destroy him. He's got a lot riding on that development. I know, I said. That's why I waited. If I'd done it 2 years ago, it would have looked like a spite move. Revenge. After he's sunk 6 months and 50 grand into surveys, permits and marketing. After he's signed contracts with buyers who now gonna walk. It looks like business, smart business. And that's exactly what it is. Dave repeated. Yeah, smart. Be careful, he's gonna come after you. Let him, I said. He's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. The zoning board meets tomorrow. I'll be there, so will Frank, and so will the truth. Chris can scream all he wants, but the law is on my side, and so is the land. I hung up. Dave's mirroring was valid, but unnecessary. Chris wasn't a threat anymore. He was a man watching his house of cards collapse, one card at a time, and I was the wind. That evening, I drove by Chris's office again. It was dark, the Mercedes was gone, but on the door, taped crookedly, was a copy of the cease and desist, fluttering in the breeze. Someone, probably the server, had left it there as a final insult. I didn't stop, just drove past. The image burned into my memory. I went home, made dinner, a simple pasta, ate it standing at the counter. The silence in the house was profound, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. The peace of knowing that the scales were finally balancing. I washed the dish, dried it, put it away. Then I walked into the living room, the room where Ra and I used to watch movies, where Chris used to sit in the Aram chair, drinking my beer, talking about his plans. I looked at that chair now, empty, gathering dust. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt done. Tomorrow was the zoning board meeting. The final act. Chris would be there, desperate, pleading, lying. But it wouldn't matter. The facts were the facts. The deeds were recorded. The law was clear. I went to bed, slept soundly, dreamed of nothing, woke up refreshed. The day of reckoning had arrived, and I was ready. CFTR 3T meeting. The zoning board meeting was held in the basement of City Hall. A low, ceilinged room with flickering fluorescent lights and the permanent smell of mildew and old coffee. I arrived 15 minutes early, finding a seat near the back. Chris was already there, front row center, hunched over his portfolio, his expensive suit looking rumpled under the rush lights. He didn't look up when I entered. Frank was there too, sitting at a small table near the podium, arranging papers with methodical precision. He gave me a slight nod as I passed. I nodded back, no words needed. The room filled up quickly. Developers, neighbors, a few local reporters. Dave, sliding into the seat next to me. Place is packed, he whispered. Word's gotten around. Chris's investors array here, couple of the buyers too. This is gonna be ugly. I grunted. Ugly was an understatement. Chris looked like a man on death row. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He kept running a hand through his hair, dislodging dandruff onto his collar. At 7:00 p.m. Sharp, a portly man named Henderson called the meeting to order. Routine business first. Vierance requests for a fence. Rocking spot. Chris shifted in his seat, his knee bouncing so odd the floor vibrated. Finally, Henderson announced the main event. Item 7, application for access easement. PA, submitted by Christopher Miller, agent for Oakwood Development, LLC. Chris stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly. He walked to the podium, his hands trembling as he spread out his plans. He launched into his pitch smooth, but with an underlying tremor of desperation. He talked about community growth, affordable housing, economic revitalization. He showed renderings of the proposed subdivision, 12 luxury homes, a community pool, walking trails. It looked impressive under the fluorescent lights. When he finished, Henderson asked the standard question. Is there any public comment? Chris's lawyer, a nervous-looking kid be a rely out of law school, stood up. Mr. Chairman, we request that Ms. Michael Benson be recognized. Benson owns the adjacent property, PA Russell 42B, and has expressed opposition to the easement. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of their sta res. I walked to the podium, my boots heavy on the linoleum. I didn't look at Chris. I looked at the board. Chairman Henderson, members of the board, I began, my voice echoing in the silent room. My name is Michael Benson. I own PRCL 42, the Cedar Street property, in fee simple. I've owned it for 26 months, acquired legally at public auction. Miller's application seeks to compel me to grant an access easement across my property to serve PARCL 42C, which he claims to represent. I paused, letting that sink in. Chris's jaw tightened. The law is clear, I continued. Under New York State Real Property Law, Section, an easement by necessity requires proof that the dominant estate, 42C, is truly landlocked, and that the easement is strictly necessary for its reasonable use. Mr. Miller claims 42C is landlocked. He's correct, but what he fails to disclose is that 42C was rendered landlocked by his own actions. He purchased 42C with full knowledge that it lacked direct road access. He gambled that he could acquire my property or force an easement through litigation. He gambled wrong. I pulled out a stack of documents, deeds, maps, title reports, and handed them to the clerk. These are certified copies of the deed to 42B, recorded 2 years ago. Note the date. Note the purchase price, paid in full cash. Also included is a topographic survey showing an alternative access route via the abandoned railroad right of way to the north. It's steeper, yes, more expensive to develop, certainly, but it exists. Therefore the necessity Miller claims is a fabrication, an inconvenience, not a legal impossibility. I looked directly at Chris for the first time. His face was mottled red and white. Furthermore, I said, my voice a-roddening, Mr. Miller's application is submitted in bad faith. 2 years ago he was my closest friend. He was the best man at my wedding. He used that trust to sabotage my marriage, to drive my wife away, and to leave me isolated. He did this while simultaneously scheming to acquire my property through manipulation and deceit. His current application is merely the latest chapter in that campaign of malice. Granting him an easement would reward fraud and punish the victim of that fraud. It would set a precedent that this board cannot afford to endorse. I stepped back from the podium. I oppose this application, not out of spite, but out of principle. My property is not a bargaining chip for Mr. Miller's failed schemes. It is my home, my investment, and my right. I ask this board to deny the application and uphold the law. I walked back to my seat. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Chris was on his feet, sputtering. That's a lie, a complete fabrication. Mike, how can you? Sit down. Henderson said sharply. This isn't a debate. You had your turn. Benson presented evidence. Do you have rebuttal evidence? Documents, surveys, or just accusations? Chris opened his mouth, then closed it. His lawyer whispered frantically in his AR. Chris shook him off. I have the surveys. They're right here. The railroad right of way is unusable. It's too steep. It'll cost a fortune to grade. Cost is not the board's concern, Henderson said. Necessity is. Benson has shown an alternative exists. You haven't proven it doesn't. Do you have anything else? Chris looked around the room. At his investors, his buyers, the reporters. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes were cold. He was drowning, and they knew it. I move to withdraw the application, he whispered. Henderson sighed. So move. Application withdrawn. This meeting is adjourned. Just like that, it was over. Chris stood frozen at the podium as the board members gathered their papers and filed out. His investors surrounded him, their voices low and angry. One of them jabbed a finger into Chris's chest. Chris didn't react. He just stood there, staring at the podium, at the wood grain, at nothing. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. Dave touched my arm. Jesus, that was brutal, but effective. I nodded. It was necessary. I walked toward the exit. As I passed Chris, he finally looked up. His eyes were wet, hollow. Mike, he choked out. I'm ruined. My career, my family, everything. I stopped, looked down at him. I said quietly. You stood in my kitchen. You told Sarah I was a drunk. You told her I was squandering our savings. You told her she deserved better. You smiled while you destroyed my life. Did you think about ruin then, Chris? Did you think about family? He flinched, tried to speak, but no words came. I turned and walked out. The night air was so bracing. Frank was waiting by his car. Well done, Mike, he said. Clean, professional. Thanks, Frank, I said. I got into my truck, started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Chris stumbling out of City Hall, his investors trailing him like vultures. He looked small, defeated. I pulled away from the curb, leaving him there. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. I didn't look back. There was nothing back there worth seeing. The meeting was over, the doer was won, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a sense of closure, not happiness. Just closure. The kind that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself, faced your demons, and walked away whole. The house on Elm was dark, but the porch light was on. I'd left it on, a beacon not for anyone else, for me, a reminder that I was still here, still standing, and nobody, not even a man I once called brother, could take that away. Got out, and stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up at the stars. They were bright tonight, unblinking, eternal. Still alone, I whispered to the night. Then I shook my head. Not anymore. I went inside, locked the door, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without setting an alarm. The fallout was swift and spectacular. Chris's name was mud in the local real estate circles. The story had leaked. Someone from the zoning board talked, probably, and it spread like a grease fire. Local realtors, big development dead after neighbor blocks access. The Gazette ran a brief piece, careful not to take sides, but the subtext was clear. Chris had overreached, and I'd shut him down. His investors sued by Friday, a class action lawsuit, alleging fraud and misrepresentation. They claimed Chris had assured them the easement was a formality, that he had personal assurances from the property owner, me, that access would be granted. Chris's lawyer released a statement denying the allegations, but the damage was done. His professional liability insurance company started asking questions. His second wife, Linda, filed for divorce the following Monday. I heard it from Dave, who heard it from his sister, who worked at the courthouse. She's citing irreconcilable differences and financial instability. Dave told me over beers at O'Malley's. She found out about the lawsuit and the debt. She's not sticking around for the sinking ship. I sipped my beer. It tasted like victory. Flat and bitter. Good for her, I said. Dave studied me. You don't seem happy, Mike. I figured you'd be celebrating. I'm not unhappy, I said. Just done. Chris made his choices. He lied, he cheated, he stole. Now he's paying for it. That's not cause for celebration. It's just justice, slow, expensive, public justice. Dave nodded slowly. Still, it's gotta feel good, knowing he's losing everything. It feels like balance, I said. I was the one losing everything, my wife, my reputation. Now the shoe's on the other foot. But I'm not gonna dance in it. That's not who I am. Dave grunted. You're a better man than me. Then, I'd be popping champagne. I smiled thinly. Save your money, Dave. Champagne's for celebrations. This is just closure. The calls started coming in, not from Chris. He'd stopped calling after the zoning board meeting, but from others, reporters wanting comments, realtors wanting to understand my perspective. Even a few of Chris's former clients, sniffing around for a bargain on the now undevelopable land. I ignored them all. Frank handled the press inquiries, issuing a one-sentence statement as Benson has no further comment and asks that his privacy be respected. Privacy, that's what I wanted, not fame, not vindication in the public eye. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd reclaimed my ground, literally and figuratively. One afternoon, about a week after the meeting, I came home to find a package on my porch. No return address. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table. It was a plain cardboard box, taped shut. I hesitated, then opened it with a kitchen knife. Inside was a photo album, our photo album. Sa and me, our wedding, our first house, vacations, holidays, pictures of us smiling, laughing, holding each other. Chris was in many of them, grinning, a arm is slung around our shoulders. The bastard had kept them, or maybe Sa had given them to him. Seeing them now felt like a punch to the gut. On top of the album was a single sheet of paper, Chris's handwriting, shaky and uneven. I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies. For the development. I was jealous. Of you. Of your stability. Of your integrity. I had none of those things, so I tried to tear yours down. I failed. And now I've lost everything. My business. My wife. My self-respect. Looking at these photos, I remember who I used to be. Before the greed. Before the envied. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to have these back. They belong with you. With the life I helped destroy. Chris, I read at the note. Then at the album, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity for the man Chris had become. A man so consumed by jealousy that he'd destroyed his own life trying to ruin mine. It was pathetic. I closed the album, put it back in the box. I didn't throw it away, didn't burn it. Just put it in the hall closet, on the top shelf, behind the winter coats. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, I dreamed of Sa, not the fights, not the divorce, just her smile. The way she used to hum while washing dishes. The way she'd lean her head on my shoulder during a movie. I woke up with a lump in my throat, but no tears, just a quiet ache. In the morning, I called Frank. I want to sell the said AR Street property, I said. Frank was silent for a beat. You sure? It's your ace in the hole. It served its purpose, I said. Keeping it just ties me to Chris. To the past. I don't need it anymore. List it. Quiet re. I want a clean break. Alright, Frank said. I'll handle it. But Mike, don't expect top dollar. Landlocked PRCs don't fetch premium prices. I don't see Ray about the price, I said. I see Ray about the closure. Sell it to a logger, a conservation group, anyone but Chris or his associates. Get it off my books. Consider it done, Frank said. I hung up, then walked to the closet, pulled down the box with the photo album, ride it out to the truck, drove to the dump on the edge of town, paid the fee, dropped the box onto the conveyor belt, watching it slide toward the compactor. The last physical link to Chris gone. As I drove away, I felt lighter, not healed, but lighter. The weight of 2 years was slowly lifting. That weekend, Dave invited me over for a co-out. Just the two of us, burgers, beer, baseball on the radio, no drama, no ex-friends, just two guys, shooting the breeze. Chris filed for bankruptcy. Dave mentioned casually, flipping a burger, Chapter 7, liquidation. He's selling everything, the Mercedes, the office furniture, even his golf clubs. Linda got the house in the divorce, but she's putting it on the MA rocket. They're both moving out of state. Rumor is he's heading to Florida, to stay with his brother. I grunted. Fitting. Humidity, alligators, and failed dreams. Dave laughed. You're a cold bastard, Mike. But you're right, it fits. We ate in silence for a while. Then Dave said, you ever wonder what if, man? What if Chris had never, Would you and Sa still be together? I thought about it. Really thought. I said finally. Chris was the catalyst, yeah. But the cracks were already there. The long hours, the money stress, the slow drift apart, he just widened them, accelerated the fall. If it hadn't been him, it might have been something else. A different fight, a different betrayal. We were already on borrowed time. Dave nodded. That's deep, man. Deep and sad. It's honest, I said. And honesty's better than pretending. I love Sarah, part of me always will, but she's gone, and I'm still here. That's the reality. I'm running to live with it. Dave clapped me on the shoulder. You're doing good, Mike. Better than good. You're surviving, thriving even, without the drama, without the lies. Just me. I echoed. I looked up at the sky, at the clouds drifting lazily by. And that's enough, for now. The fallout had settled. The dust had cleared. Chris was gone, physically and professionally. Sa was a memory, and I was still standing, alone, yes, but alone by choice, not by circumstance. And that made all the difference. I finished my burger, drained my beer, and helped Dave clean up the grill. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, but temporary, like everything. Like Chris's empire, like my marriage, like the pain. But the truck, the house, the silence, those were real, permanent, mine. And for a man who'd spent 2 years having everything stripped away, ownership of himself, his space, his peace, was the only victory that mattered. Autumn bled into winter, the leaves fell, the days shortened, and the first frost painted the grass white. I kept busy, work at the shop, maintenance on the house, long walks in the woods behind Elm Street. The silence became a companion, not a void. I didn't miss the noise of Chris's lies or Sa absence. I missed the idea of them, perhaps, but not the reality. Frank sold the said AR Street property in November to a local timber company for a fraction of its potential value, but enough to cover the taxes and leave a small profit. I signed the papers without hesitation. Another tie severed. Another chapter closed. Then, in Raleigh December, the call came. Not from Frank, not from Dave, from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Mike, the voice was raspy, unfamiliar. It's Chris. I leaned back in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear. Chris, I said. Flat. Yeah, he said, a pause, filled with the static of a bad connection. Look, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I'm back in town just for a few days, seeing Linda one last time, packing up the last of my stuff. I wanted to see you, to say goodbye properly, face to face. I was silent for a long moment, processing. Chris was back voluntarily. Why? I said finally. Why now? Why bother? Another pause. Because I owe you, not money, not apologies, just acknowledgement of what it cost. And I'm dying, Mike. The word hung in the air, dying. I didn't react, didn't gasp, didn't offer sympathy, just waited. Liver cancer, Chris continued, his voice cracking, stage 4. Diagnosed in Florida. They gave me 6 months, maybe less. Linda knows, she's been decent about it, letting me stay at the house until I find a place. But I couldn't leave without seeing you. Without telling you. It wasn't just jealousy, Mike, it was more. I was sick in the head, resentful, bitter, and I took it out on you, on Esra, because you had what I wanted, stability, honesty, a life that made sense. I tried to break it because I couldn't build my own, and I'm sorry truly, for the first time in my life, I'm truly sorry. He stopped, breathing heavily into the phone. I could hear the rattle in his chest, the reality of his mortality. And you want what? I asked. My voice was still flat, detached. An absolution, a handshake. A chance to unburden your soul before you go. I want you to know, Chris whispered. That's all. Know the truth. And maybe understand, not forgive, just understand. I'll be at the old diner on Main, Millie's, tomorrow at noon. If you come, fine. I'll understand that too. Goodbye, Mike. Or maybe not, maybe just so long. He hung up, the line went dead. I lowered the phone, stay ring at the blank screen, dying. Liver cancer. The news should have evoked something. Anger, satisfaction, pity, relief. It evoked nothing, just a vast, echoing emptiness. I didn't go the next day, or the day after. I went to work, fixed transmissions, ate dinner. The news sat in the back of my mind like a stone in a shoe. Present, annoying, but not debilitating. On the third day, I drove by Millie's. It was a greasy spoon, unchanged in 30 years. Through the window I saw Chris. He was thinner, his face sunken, his skin sallow. He was sitting in a booth near the back. A cup of coffee untouched in front of him. He looked small, shrunken. The vibrant, arrogant man I'd known was gone, replaced by a frail shadow. I kept driving, didn't stop, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him. What was there to say? Sorry you're dying. I wasn't. Hope you suffer. Redundant. He was already suffering. Forgive you. Impossible. That evening, Dave called. Ran into Chris at the grocery store. He said, "Man, he looks like death. You're meet over. Said he's leaving town Saturday. Wanted to see you, but you're avoiding him. Can't say I blame you, but hell, Mike, the guy's dying. Maybe you should hear him out. For closure. For you if not for him." I repeated. I had closure when the zoning board denied his application. When I sold the property. When I threw the photo album in the dump. I don't need his deathbed confession to feel whole. Dave said. But maybe you need it to feel human. Holding on to hate, even justified hate, eats you up, man. Seen it happen. Don't let him win by poisoning your peace, even from the grave. I didn't respond, just grunted and hung up. Dave's words nagged at me. Hate. Was I holding on to hate? I didn't feel hate, I felt indifference. A vast, yawning indifference to Chris's fate. But maybe Dave was right. Maybe indifference was just hate in a different coat. Saturday morning, Chris's last day. I woke Rye, made coffee, stood by the window. The sky was gray, threatening snow. I thought about Chris. About the 2 years of my life they'd stolen. I thought about the man I'd become in their wake. Surer, quieter, more self-reliant. Was that a bad thing, or was it survival? At 11:30 am I got in the truck, drove to Millie's. PA rocked across the street, watched. Chris was still there, alone. Stia rang at his coffee. He looked up once, glancing toward the window, as if sensing my presence. Our eyes met briefly through the glass. He didn't wave, just looked, then looked away. I sat in the truck for 10 minutes, the engine ticking as it led. Then I got out, walked across the street, pushed open the door to Millie's. The bell jingled. Chris didn't look up. I walked to his booth, slid into the seat opposite him. He finally looked at me. His eyes were watery, yellowed. He whispered, You came, you're dying, I said. Figured I owed you at least that much, to witness it. He managed a weak smile. Honest as always. Sit. I sat. Millie came over, raised an eyebrow at me. I ordered black coffee. She left, silence descended, broken only by the clatter of dishes and the low murmur of other patrons. Chris wrapped his hands around his mug. Thank you, he said, for coming. I know it's a lot to ask. It is, I agreed. He took a shaky breath. I meant what I said on the phone. About the cancer, about the jealousy, about everything. I was a poison. To myself, to Sarah, to you. And now I'm just paying the price. Slowly, I sipped my coffee. It was hot bitter. Why Sarat, I asked, not accusing, just asked. Why reject her? Why destroy our marriage? He looked down at his hands. They were spotted, veined. Because she believed in you, he whispered. She saw the good in you that I refused to see. She defended you when I criticized. She loved you, truly loved you, and I hated that. Hated that she could love someone so completely when I couldn't love anyone, not even myself. So I convinced her you were a lie, that the man she loved wasn't real, and she wanted to believe me. Because it was easier than facing the truth about me, about us, about her own loneliness. He looked up, his eyes wet. I didn't just ruin your marriage, Mike. I killed her trust, her faith, her ability to love, and that's the worst thing I've ever done. Worse than the lies, worse than the theft, worse than the development. I broke her spirit, and I can never fix that. Even if she'd stayed with you. I'd already poisoned the well. I read it. The truth of his words settled over me like a shroud. He was right. He hadn't just ended a marriage. He'd shattered the foundation of trust upon which it was built. Sarah hadn't just left, she'd left the idea of me, the belief in me. Because Chris had convinced her that belief was a lie. And now, I asked, now you're dying, and you want me to, what, feel sorry for you? Tell you it's okay. He shook his head. No, I want you to remember. Remember the man you were before I broke you. Remember the man you are now, after you survived it, and remember that I was the one who taught you the difference between weakness and strength, between trust and caution, between love and whatever it was I offered Sarah. I don't want forgiveness. I want you to know that my life, my miserable, failed, destructive life, wasn't meaningless. It was a lesson for you, a brutal, painful lesson, but a lesson nonetheless. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. He didn't try to touch me, just pointed a finger. Don't forget, Mike. Don't forget what I did. Don't forget how it felt, and don't make the same mistakes, with yourself, with others. Hold on to that hardness. It'll keep you alive. But don't let it turn you into me. He withdrew his hand, exhausted. That's all. That's everything. Thank you. For listening. For witnessing. For being the man I could never be. He stood up slowly, gripping the table for support. He looked down at me, his face a mask of pain and regret. Goodbye, Mike, or maybe just goodbye. He turned and walked out of the diner, his steps shuffling, his shoulders hunched. I watched him go, through the window, until he disappeared around the corner. The bell jingled softly in his wake. I sat there for a long time, finishing my coffee. It had gone cold. I didn't mind. The taste was the same. I didn't feel closure. I didn't feel peace. I felt formed, educated. Chris had laid bare his soul, not to seek forgiveness, but to ensure his legacy wasn't just failure, but instruction. He'd wanted me to remember him, not as a victimizer, but as a cautionary tale. And I'd remember the arrogance, the jealousy, the destruction. I'd remember the zoning boyard, the photo album, the silence. And I'd remember this moment. The dying man in the diner, offering not repentance, but a douai running. I stood up, left a tip on the table, and walked out. The air outside was sheer. Snow was starting to fall, fat flakes drifting down. I looked in the direction Chris had gone. He was back to Florida. Back to his brother, back to his death. I got in my truck, rotted the engine. As I drove away, I realized something. Chris hadn't asked for forgiveness. He'd asked for remembrance, and in denying him forgiveness, I'd given him exactly what he wanted. Because forgetting would have been the true mercy, remembering was the true punishment. And I was okay with that. The snow fell, covering the windshield, covering the tracks, covering the past, but underneath, the truth remained, etched in memory, etched in stone. I drove home. The house on Elm was quiet mine. I walked inside, locked the door, and stood in the silence. Chris was gone. Sarah was a memory, and I was still here, but not lonely, and definitely not broken, just, chapter 6 teach well. 3 months later, the letter came, not from Chris, he was long dead, buried in a pauper's plot in Florida, according to Dave, but from a probate attorney in Sarasota. I almost tossed it unopened, assuming it was a scam or a bill for his cremation, but the official letterhead gave me pause. I sliced it open with a kitchen knife. Inside was a copy of Chris's will, brief, handwritten, witnessed by 2 nurses at the hospice, and a cover letter from the attorney. Dar missive. Pursuant to the last will and testament of Christopher M. Miller deceased, you are hereby named as the sole beneficiary of a specific bequest. Mr. Miller directed that upon his death, the enclosed item be delivered to you personally, all other assets being negligible, have been absorbed by outstanding debts and funeral expenses. Please find the enclosed as instructed. Sincerely, Janet Vances. Enclosed was a key, a small brass house key, taped to a plain white card, in Chris's shaky script. Mike, the key to the shed behind 412 Maple Street, the one I used for storage. There's something in there for you, something I couldn't mail, something you need to see. Burn it, keep it, bury it, your choice, but see it, for me. For the truth. C. 412 Maple Street, Chris's old house. The one he'd lived in before the divorce, before the Mercedes, before the lies. The one where Sarah and I had spent countless evenings. Where Chris had been a regular guest, where the rot had begun. It had been sold after his bankruptcy, flipped by some investor. I hadn't been back since the night Sarah left. I stared at the key, the shed. What could possibly be in a shed that were granted a bequest in a will? More lies, a confession, a final fuck you from beyond the grave. I didn't go that day, or the next. The key sat on my kitchen table, a silent accusation. Dave called. He aired about the will from the grapevine. The shed man, that's creepy. Probably full of rats and mold, or worse. Maybe he buried something back there. A body, nah, too dramatic, but still. I knew Dave was right. Macabre, but it was also Chris's last act, his final attempt to control the narrative, even from the grave, and I'd be damned if I let him. 2 weeks later, I drove to Maple Street. The house was freshly painted. A sold sign still staked in the front yard. The new owners, a young couple, I guessed, had planted tulips along the walkway. Life moving on, erasing the past. I walked around the side of the house, through the narrow gap between the fence and the garage. The shed was still there, a small, weathered structure, its shingles curling, its padlock rust. I fitted the key into the lock, it stuck, then turned with a screech of metal on metal. I lifted the latch, pulled the door open. The smell hit me first, damp earth, rotting wood, mouse droppings. It was defeat, the only light filtering through gaps in the roof. I stepped in, my boots crunching on debris. Cobwebs brushed I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight. The shed was mostly empty, a rusted lawnmower, a stack of terracotta pots, a coil of rotted garden hose, and in the far corner, a metal filing cabinet, small green. The kind you'd find in a dentist's office. It wasn't locked. I pulled open the top drawer. It was stuffed with files, manila folders, crammed tight. I pulled one out, labeled, Miller, Sarah, Personal. Benson, Michael, Finances. Affair, Cover Stories. Divorce strategy. My hands started to shake. I dropped the folder, scattering papers. I knelt, picking them up. Photocopies of bank statements. Mine, Sarah's, notes in Chris's handwriting. Mike's overtime pay hide in CAR repairs category. Sarah's bonus divert to secret account. Printouts of text messages. Between Chris and Sarah, intimate, manipulative. He doesn't appreciate you, baby. You deserve better than this boring life. Leave him. I'll take care of you. There were photos, Sarah and Chris, kissing in a P-Rock car, Sarah and Chris, holding hands at a motel, Sarah and Chris, smiling at a restaurant, the same restaurant where she'd told me she wanted a divorce. And then the worst, a thick folder labeled, Final Push. Inside were drafts of the separation agreement, heavily annotated by Chris, notes on how to maximize my financial liability, how to minimize Sarah's, a timeline for the divorce proceedings, designed to drag out the conflict, increase the legal fees, bleed me dry. And a letter, unsigned, addressed to Sarah. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means we're almost there, almost free of him. Remember, you can't waver now. He'll try to guilt you, try to remind you of the good times. Don't listen. The good times were a lie, propped up by my lies. The truth is, he's holding you back. With me, you'll fly. But only if you're brave enough to cut the cord completely. No red custody of the memories. Leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back and the shame in his heart. That's the only way to be truly free. Yoes. I read it twice. 3. The words blurred. My vision swam. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated, systematic dismantling of my life. Chris hadn't just slept with my wife. He'd orchestrated the entire collapse. He'd manipulated her emotions, falsified our financial records, strategized the legal destruction, and planned the aftermath. He'd treated my marriage like a business merger gone wrong, and he was the hostile takeover artist. I sat back on my heels. The papers scattered around me, The shed was spinning. The air was thick. I felt sick, not just by the affair, but by the sheer audacity of the planning, the meticulousness of the betrayal. I thought about the diner, Chris's confession, his talk of jealousy, of sickness. It had been a puerile truth, a smokescreen. He'd admitted to the sin, but not the scale, not the machinery of the betrayal. He'd framed it as a personal failing, a moment of weakness, but this was premeditated, cold-blooded evil. I gathered the files, stacking them methodically. My movements were robotic, precise. I carried them out of the shed, into the sunlight. The tulips seemed obscene in their brightness. I loaded the files into my truck, covering them with a tarp, drove home. I didn't open them again that day, or the next. They sat in the truck bed, a toxic targo. I moved them to the garage, stacked them on a workbench, covered them with a drop cloth. I didn't tell Dave, didn't tell Frank, didn't tell anyone. This was between me and the ghost of Chris Miller, and Essra wherever she was. I spent the next week in a daze, working, eating, sleeping, but the files were there, in the back of my mind, a constant pressure. The truth wasn't just a punch to the gut, it was a slow-acting poison. I'd thought I'd processed the betrayal. I'd thought I'd moved on. But this was a new level, a deeper cut. One night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went to the garage, pulled off the drop cloth, and opened the top file. I stay rotted reading. Chronologically, from the first flirtatious text to the final legal maneuver, I read until the garage light casting long shadows. When I finished, I closed the file. My hands were steady, my heart was calm, but my understanding had shifted. Chris hadn't just ruined my marriage, he'd erased it. He'd rewritten our history, replacing love with manipulation, trust with strategy. Essra hadn't just left me. She'd been programmed to leave me, by a man who'd convinced her that freedom required my total annihilation. And the most chilling part, the letter to Essra. Leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back and the shame in his heart. That had been the goal. Not just divorce, not just separation, total destruction. And he'd almost succeeded. Almost. I stood up, stretching. The garage was cold, but I felt a strange heat in my chest. Not anger, not sorrow. Resolve, pure, undiluted resolve. Chris had left me a key, not to a treasure, but to a tomb. The tomb of my marriage, exhumed and laid bare, and in doing so, he'd given me the final piece of the puzzle. The confirmation that my instincts had been right all along. The betrayal wasn't a mystery, it was a blueprint. And blueprints could be studied. Lighten used to build something stronger. I didn't burn the files, didn't bury them. I put them in a fireproof safe, alongside the deed to the said AR Street property, alongside the memory of the zoning board meeting. They were part of my history now. The dark do the necessier. The next morning, I woke up awry, made coffee, stood by the window. The sky was clear, the air was crisp. I felt grounded. The shaking had stopped. The nausea had passed. In its place was a quiet, unshakable certainty. Chris had won the battle for my marriage, but he'd lost the douar for my soul. Because I'd survived, I'd learned, and I'd remembered. And remembering, even the ugliest truths, was the only way to ensure they never happened again. I picked up the brass key from the kitchen table, held it in my palm. It was small, but it had unlocked a universe of pain, and in that pain, I'd found my strength. I dropped the key into the safe, closed the door, spun the dial. The shed was empty now. The files were secured, and I was free. Free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from the ghost of a man who'd thought he could own me by destroying what I loved. He'd been wrong. He'd only taught me how much I could endure, and how much I could overcome. I walked outside into the morning sun, took a deep breath. The air was sweet, clean, still alone. I whispered to the wind, then I smiled. Always, and finally, completely. I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove to work. The day was waiting, and so was the rest of my life. Ishtar. The files from the shed sat in the safe for 6 months. I didn't look at them, didn't touch them. They were a closed chapter, a dark secret I kept locked away. But they were there, a constant presence, like a tooth you ignore until it becomes unbearable. Then, in late spring, the second letter came. Not from Chris's lawyer this time, from a woman named Eleanor Vance, Chris's mother. I hadn't heard from her in years. She'd never approved of Chris's lifestyle, his affairs, his arrogance. She'd been a quiet, stern woman, widowed young, who'd raised Chris alone with a strict moral code he'd promptly ignored. The letter was handwritten, on expensive stationery. The script was spidery but firm. Dr. Michael, I hope this finds you well. I apologize for the intrusion after all this time. I am writing to you because my son, Christopher, asked me to. On his deathbed, he gave me a letter, for you. He made me promise to wait 6 months before sending it. He said you needed time, time to heal, time to process, time to forget. But he also said you would need to read it. For your sake, and for Essa Roth. I enclosed the letter herewith. I have not read it. Christopher made me swear I would not. I honor his wishes, though I confess to a deep curiosity. Christopher was a troubled boy, Michael, brilliant, but troubled. He sought to fill a void with things that could never satisfy. Money, status, the wives of other men. He destroyed much in his wake, including, I fear your happiness. Read this letter, if you can, or burn it if you must. But know that it comes from a mother who loved her son, despite his failings, and who hopes, vainly perhaps, that some small measure of peace might come from his final words. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. Inside was a second envelope, cream-colored, sealed with red wax. Chris's initials embossed in the center, my name on the front, in his shaky, final script. I held it for a long time. The shed files had been a factual assault. Documents, dates, evidence. This was different. This was personal, emotional, potentially explosive. I almost tossed it into the wood stove. Unopened, let the past stay buried. But Eleanor's words. For your sake, and for Essa Ross. Sarah. I hadn't spoken her name in months. Hadn't allowed myself to think of her beyond the context of the betrayal. But Chris had mentioned her in the diner, and now his mother mentioned her. Was there something more? Something I didn't know. Curiosity, cold and clinical, won out. I broke the seal, unfolded the single sheet of paper. The handwriting was worse than the envelope. Be really legible in places. The letters looping and trembling. But the words were clear. Mike. If you're reading this, Mom kept her promise 6 months. Enough time for the initial sting of the shed to fade. Enough time for you to maybe start breathing again without the weight of my files crushing your chest. Good. I'm writing this, because there's one thing I didn't put in the shed. One truth I couldn't commit to paper while I was alive. Because it would have been used against me, or against a rock. She didn't leave you because she stopped loving you, Mike. She left because I convinced her that staying would destroy you. I fabricated medical records, high blood pressure, stress-induced cardiomyopathy. I told her the doctors said another year of your renal tension would kill you. I showed her forged letters from your doctor, confirming it. I played on her love for you, Mike. I twisted it into a weapon. I told her the most loving thing she could do was leave, let you think she'd fallen out of love, so you'd have a chance to live. She believed me, because she loved you that much. Because she couldn't bear the thought of you dying. She left, not because she wanted to, but because she thought it was the only way to save your life. I coached her on what to say, how to act, distant, cruel. I told her it was the only way to make you let her go without suspicion, and she did it. She played her part perfectly. Because she loved you. I have no proof of this, Mike, no files, no recordings, just my word, which, I know, counts for less than nothing, but I swear it on my mother's grave, on my soul such as it is. Essa Ra didn't cheat on you because she was bored. She didn't leave you because she stopped caring. She did it because I told her it was the only way to keep you alive, and she chose your life over her own happiness. I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's remarried, or alone, or happy or miserable. I cut contact after the divorce, told her never to reach out to you, for your own good. I told her I'd monitor you, report back on your health. I lied, of course. I just wanted her gone, out of my sight, so I didn't have to face what I'd done. But before I die, I need you to know, Essa Ra was the Viv, maybe more than you. I used her love as a scalpel, Mike, and I carved up your rage with it. You have every right to hate me, but don't hate her, please. If there's any way, any possible way, to find her, tell her the truth. Tell her I lied. Tell her she can stop running. Tell her, she saved you. I don't expect forgiveness, from you or from her. I just need the truth to outlive me, even if it's just by a day. Goodbye. And thank you, for the friendship I abused, for the trust I shattered, for the life I tried to steal. You were always the better man. I just couldn't stand to live in your shadow. Christopher. I read it once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. The implications didn't lessen. Sarah hadn't stopped loving me. She'd left to save my life, based on a lie. A monstrous, elaborate lie. My hand started to shake. The paper rustled. I looked at the date on the letter. 3 days before he died. He'd written this while he was dying, knowing the truth would unravel everything, knowing it might give me a sliver of peace, or open a wound that would never heal. I thought about Sarah. The way she'd looked at me in the final weeks. Hollow, haunted but determined. The cruelty of her words. I don't love you anymore. I never really did. The way she'd packed her bags without looking back. I'd thought it was callousness, indifference. Now I wondered if it had been an act A performance forced upon her by a man who'd preyed on her greatest weakness, her love for me. I stood up, the letter crumpled in my fist. I walked to the window, staring out at the backyard. The woods were green, vibrant, full of life. Sarah had chosen life, at the cost of her own happiness. And I'd spent 2 years hating her for it. The irony was a physical blow. Chris had won by making me hate the one person who'd actually sacrificed for me. He'd turned my love into a weapon against itself. I uncrumpled the letter, smoothed it out, read it again. The phrase, "Tell her she saved you," echoed in my mind. How could I tell her? I didn't know where she was. Chris had made sure of that. He'd cut the thread, then tossed the spool into the abyss. I spent the next hour pacing the kitchen, thinking, planning. Chris had been meticulous. He would have left a trail, a clue, something. He wouldn't have just confessed. He would have provided a way to verify, or a way to find her. I went to the safe, pulled out the shed files, started going through them again. Not the financial records, not the legal strategies, the personal ones. The photos, the texts. I looked for patterns, locations, anything that might hint at Sarah's whereabouts post-divorce. In a folder labeled Aftermath, I found it, a single receipt, dated 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, for a bus ticket, one-way, to Missoula, Montana, purchased under the name Sarah Miller, her maiden name, paid for in cash. The purchase location, the Greyhound station downtown, Missoula, Montana. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A thread. I sat back holding the receipt. Chris had kept it. Why? As a trophy, as a reminder of his success, or as a breadcrumb, a final, twisted clue for me to follow. I thought about Eleanor's letter. Read this letter, if you can, or burn it, if you must. I couldn't burn it, and I couldn't ignore it. Sarah was out there, believing a lie, believing she'd saved me by leaving, and I was here, believing a lie, believing she'd abandoned me. The truth was a two-edged sword. It would cut both ways, but it had to be told. I picked up the phone. "Frank, it's Mike. I need a favor, a big one. I need a private investigator, discreet, experienced. I need them to find someone. A woman, Sarah Miller, last known location, Missoula, Montana. Years ago. I have a lead, a bus ticket. I need to know if she's still there, if she's alive, anything." Frank was silent for a moment. Then, "You sure about this after everything?" Reopening that door. "I'm sure," I said. My voice was steady, because the door was never closed. It was just locked. "And I've got the key now. I'll make some calls." Frank said, "Give me 24 hours. I hung up, looked at the letter again. Chris's final words, "Tell her she saved you." I would. If I found her, I'd tell her, and then I'd let her decide, if she wanted to stay lost, or if she wanted to come home. But first, I had to find her. The letter had changed everything, and nothing. The pain was still there, the betrayal was still real, but the reason behind it, that was different. And in that difference lay a possibility, a fragile, terrifying possibility, hope. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope, put it in the safe, alongside the bus ticket receipt, closed the door. The search had begun, and this time, I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for the truth, and maybe, just maybe, for Sarah. Art. Frank's pie, a grizzled ex-cop named Ray, took the case with a grunt and a "leave it to me." He didn't ask why, didn't judge, just took the bus ticket receipt, the photo of Sarah from the shed files, and my check for $1,000 retainer. "Missoula's a big place," he said, "but people leave traces. Give me a week." 7 days of silence. I worked, I ate, I slept, but my mind was in Montana. I imagined Sarah in a small apartment, working a quiet job, looking out at the mountains. Or maybe she'd rem a ride. Maybe she had kids, a new life, a life built on a lie Chris had told her. The thought was a constant ache. On the 8th day, Ray called. "Found her," he said without preamble. "Sarah Miller, living in Missoula. Goes by Kent now. Right, a guy named Ben Kent, construction foreman, 18 months ago. No kids, works at a library. Rye. Address is 418 Pine Street, A3B. She's okay, Mike. Seems settled." "But what?" I said, my throat tight. "She's alone a lot," Ray said. "Ben works long hours, travels for jobs. She spends her evenings at the library. Even when she's off duty, volunteers for the literacy program, keeps to herself. Neighbors say she's quiet, polite, sad. Like she's waiting for something that ain't never coming." Sad waiting, the words hit hard. She was living the life Chris had forced on her, a half-life built on a lie. "Any contact with Chris?" I asked. Ray said, "Her phone records are clean. Mail goes to a P.O. box, no social media. She's off the grid, deliberately, like she's hiding, or like she's grieving. Grieving, for me, for us, for the life she'd sacrificed." I thanked Ray, wired him the balance, hung up, sat in the silence of my kitchen. Sarah was alive, but not happy, not whole. Chris's lie had followed her, shaping her choices, dictating her solitude. I had the address, I could write, call. But what would I say? It's Mike. Found you after 2 years, by the way. Chris lied. You didn't leave because you stopped loving me. You left because he told you I'd die if you stayed. Surprise, it was cruel, abrupt. It would shatter whatever peace she'd built, but staying silent was crueler. Letting her believe the lie. Letting her live with the guilt, the sorrow, the what-ifs. I spent 3 days wrestling with it. Dave noticed. You're twitchier than a cat on a hot tin roof. Man, what's up? I find something. I told him. Everything. The letter from Chris's mom. The letter from Chris. The bus ticket. Missoula, Sarah Kent. Dave listened, his face growing grimmer with each detail. Holy shit, he whispered when I finished. Holy shit, Mike. That's messed up. Beyond messed up. That's operatic. So what you gonna do? I don't know, I said honestly. Call her. Show up, send a letter. Every option feels wrong, intrusive. Like I'm just another man disrupting her life based on Chris's games. Chris is dead, Mike, Dave said. His games are over, but his lies are still alive, in her head, in her heart. You gotta tell her. Man to man, woman to woman, whatever. She deserves the truth. She sacrificed her marriage based on a lie. She deserves to know it was a lie, even if it hurts, even if it changes nothing. She deserves that. Deserves, I repeated. Yes, she deserves. But what if it breaks her? What if she's happy with this Ben guy? What if I'm just bringing back a ghost she's finally laid to rest? Then you'll know, Dave said simply. And she'll know. And then you both can decide what to do with the truth. But you can't decide for her, Mike. You can't keep her in the dark because you're afraid of the light. He was right, of course he was. I was afraid. Afraid of her reaction, afraid of my own. Afraid of opening a door that might never close again. But Dave was right. She deserved the truth, even if it was just a letter. A simple, factual letter. I wrote it that night. Short, direct. No emotion, just the facts. Sarah, I know where you are. I know about Missoula, about Ben. I'm sorry for the intrusion. I'm writing because Chris left a letter. Before he died, in it, he confessed that you left our marriage not because you stopped loving me, but because he convinced you it was the only way to save my life. He fabricated medical records, he lied. You were a victim, Sarah, as much as I was. I don't write this to reopen old wounds, or to ask for anything. I write because you deserve to know the truth. You didn't abandon me, you sacrificed for me, and for that, I will always be grateful. You don't owe me a response, you don't owe me anything, but if you ever want to talk, truly talk, I'm here, in our old house, the one on Elm. It's still mine, still standing. Do with this information what you will. Burn this letter, forget you read it, or, don't, the choice is yours. As it should have been 2 years ago. Michael, I didn't sign it, love didn't sign it, your husband. Just Michael, new to respectful, giving her the power Chris had stolen. I mailed it certified, return receipt requested, then I waited. Days passed. The return receipt came back, signed by S. Kent. She'd received it, but no call, no letter, no email, just silence. I told myself it was for the best. She'd chosen to stay silent, to let the truth settle without engaging. It was her right, her choice. I'd done my part, I'd told her, now it was up to her. But the silence was heavy, oppressive. I found myself checking my phone constantly, jumping at the ring of the landline. Nothing. 3 weeks after mailing the letter, the call at 10:30 p.m., my heart stopped when I saw the area code. Montana. I answered on the second ring. Hello. Her voice, Ra's voice, older, but unmistakably hers. It's me, Suf. I sat down on the kitchen chair. I said. My voice sounded strange, even to my ears. I got your signature, on the receipt. I know, she said. I could hear her breathing shaky. I've read your letter 50 times. Maybe more. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say. I said just, the truth, as he told it. As he told it. She repeated, if it's true, if he really told me those things, then everything I did, every cruel word, it was all based on a lie. I destroyed us to save you, based on a lie. Her voice broke. I've spent 2 years, every day, telling myself it was the right thing, that I'd saved you. Even though it broke my heart. Now you're telling me it was all for nothing. That I broke us for a lie. I closed my eyes. The pain in her voice was visceral. It wasn't for nothing, Sarah. You believed it. You acted out of love. That's not nothing. That's everything. Chris used that love, twisted it, but the love itself, that was real, was it? She whispered. Or was I just naive, stupid? To believe him, to not question, to not come to you. You were manipulated, I said firmly, by a mask. He played on your deepest fears, your greatest love. Don't blame yourself for being human, Sarah. blame him, he's the one who lied, who orchestrated it, you were just the instrument. Then, I may ride, Mike to Ben, he's a good man, steady, he doesn't know about any of this, about you, about Chris. I told him I was a widow, that my husband died in a car accident. It was easier than the truth. Widow, the word was a knife. I understand, I said, and I did. It was easier, safer, a clean break, except it wasn't a break, it was a scar. I'm not happy, she said suddenly. Ben is good to me, but I'm not present, I'm always, somewhere else, with you, with the lie, with the ghost of what we were. I thought staying away was the only way to keep you safe, and now I don't know what's real anymore. You're real, I said, the love was real, the sacrifice was real, the rest, the medical records, the threats, the urgency, that was Chris, but you, Esra, you were real, and you're still real, and you're still, you, am I, she asked, or am I just a ghost too, haunting myself? I didn't have an answer for that, so I said the only thing I could, I don't know Esra, but I'm here. If you need to talk, if you need to remember, or if you just need to know that the man you saved, he's still here, still standing, because of you, even if it was based on a lie. Silence, then a soft sob. I'm so sorry, for everything, for believing him, for hurting you, for leaving, for not being stronger. Don't be sorry, I said, be you, whoever that is now, and know that I don't hate you. I never did. I hated Chris. I hated the lies. Thank you, she whispered, for saying that, for the truth. I don't know what happens now. I don't know if I can face you, or if I can keep living this lie with Ben, but thank you for telling me. I'll always be here, Esra, I said, on Elm, in the quiet, if you ever need. Goodbye, Mike, she said, and this time it sounded final. Goodbye, Esra, I replied. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The kitchen was silent. The air was heavy. We'd talked. We'd acknowledged the truth, and then we'd said goodbye, again. But this goodbye felt different. It wasn't born of cruelty or manipulation, it was born of truth, and maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward healing, for both of us. I put the phone down, walked to the window. The moon was full, casting long shadows. Esra was out there in Montana, grappling with the truth, and I was here, in New York, doing the same. We were both still alone. But we weren't alone in the lie anymore. We were alone in the truth, and that, perhaps, was a beginning. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the silence, thinking Esra's voice, her pain, her resilience. She'd survived Chris's manipulation. She'd built a new life, however hollow, and now she had the truth. It would either break her completely, or set her free. I hoped for the latter, for her sake, and maybe, in some small way, for mine. The sea rush was over. The truth had been told, and now, the Esherardis PR began, living with it. Tichi Vesit, summer bled into autumn, the leaves turned, then fell. I went through the motions, work, eat, sleep, but my mind was anchored to that phone call. Esra's voice, her pain. I told myself it was over, that I'd done my PR, that she'd chosen her path in Montana. But the silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't the silence of ignorance, it was the silence of knowing. And that made all the difference. Then, on a gray November afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was in the garage, changing the oil in my truck. I wiped my hands on a rag, frowning. Nobody rang the doorbell. Dave texted. Frank called. The world communicated digitally. A physical ring was an anomaly. I walked to the front door, peered through the peephole, and froze. Esra, she was standing on my porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, a scarf hiding most of her face. But I knew her, knew the slope of her shoulders, the way she held her head slightly tilted, as if listening for something. She looked older, thinner, but it was her, undeniable. I didn't move, didn't open the door. Just, my heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. Montana was 2,000 miles away. She was my ride. She'd said goodbye. She wasn't supposed to be here. She shifted her weight, glancing over her shoulder at the street. Then she looked back at the door, as if sensing my presence. She reached up, slowly, and pulled down the scarf. Her eyes met the peephole, direct, unflinching. They were tired, shadowed, but clear. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked at me, through the distorted glass, waiting. I unlocked the door, opened it. The cold air rushed in. She stood there, her breath misting, a small suitcase at her feet. Mike, she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. I didn't know where else to go. I stepped back wordlessly. She walked in, her boots clicking on the rodwood. She looked around the living room. The same room where Chris had once held court, where we'd watched movies, where she'd told me she was leaving. It was unchanged. Spie Rartan, my sanctuary. She stopped in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking it in. Then she looked at me. The same, she whispered. Mostly, I said. My voice sounded rusty. New couch, old one wore out, she nodded, walking over to the fireplace, ran a finger along the mantel. Collecting dust. You kept it, she said. The house, I own it, I said. Free. Chris couldn't touch it. She turned to me. I know, I saw the records, in the shed. I went back there. After your letter, I had to see to understand. I saw what he'd done, the files, the plans, the letter to me. Her voice caught. The one where he told me to leave you with nothing. I read it, and I understood everything. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. Why now, Esra? Why come here? You have a life in Montana, a husband. She said, simply. Left 3 weeks ago. Said he couldn't live with a ghost. Said I was never really there. He was right. She looked down at her hands. Took the bus. I've been traveling for 2 days. I didn't call, didn't write. I just came. Because this is the only place that feels real. Even if it's a reality I destroyed. She looked up, her eyes wet. I'm not asking for anything, Mike. Not forgiveness, not a place to stay, not us, I know that's gone, buried under Chris's lies. I needed to be here, where it happened, where it ended, where maybe it can begin again, differently, quietly as friends, or just as two people who survived the same wreck. I studied her. She looked exhausted, broken. But there was a core of steel in her I hadn't seen before. She'd left Ben. She'd traveled across the country. She'd come here, to the scene of the crime, seeking not restoration but truth, and maybe a fragile peace. You can stay, I said finally. Guest room. Down the hall, first door on the left. Bathrooms across the hall. Kitchen stocked. Help yourself. No expectations. You stay as long as you need. Then you leave, or you don't, your choice. She nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. That's more than I deserve. Deserve has nothing to do with it, I said. Survival does, we both survive. Now we figure out what comes after. She picked up her suitcase, walked down the hall. I heard the guest room door open, then close soft. I stayed in the living room, listening to the silence. The house felt different now, not empty, occupied, by a ghost, or by a survivor, maybe both. I walked to the kitchen, made coffee, black, poured much, ride one to the guest room door, knocked once. Come in, she called softly. I opened the door. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her coat off, her hands folded in her lap. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. I set the mug on the nightstand. Thanks, she said. I nodded. Turn to leave, Mike, she said. I paused. Why did you keep the house? After everything? I looked back at her. Because it's mine, I said. Because Chris couldn't take it. Because Sarah, the real Sarah, she loved this house. Before Chris poisoned it, I kept it for her, for the memory of her. Not the ghost, the memory. She looked down, her shoulders shaking, silent sobs. I didn't comfort her, didn't touch her, just stood there, until the sobs subsided. Then I left, closing the door. I spent the evening in the rage, organizing, listening to the sounds of the house. The creak of a floorboard, the flush of a toilet, the quiet movement of a person trying not to disturb the silence. It was strange, unnatural. At 10:00 p.m., I knocked on her door again. Lights out, I said. Okay, she replied. I went to bed, slept deep, for the first time in months, no dreams, no ghosts, just sleep. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. I got up, walked to the kitchen, was there, dressed in jeans and a sweater I didn't recognize. She was at the stove, flipping bacon, the coffee pot gurgling. She looked normal, domestic, like she belonged there. She glanced at me, offered a tentative smile. Morning, hope you don't mind. Made extra. I grunted, poured a cup of coffee, leaned against the counter. Watched her. She moved with a quiet efficiency, plating the bacon, scrambling eggs, setting the table. No small talk, no apologies. We ate in silence. The bacon was crisp, the eggs were fluffy, the coffee was strong. It was the best breakfast I'd had in 2 years. After a hour she read the table, washed the dishes I dried. We worked side by side, not speaking, comfortable in the silence. When the dishes were done, she turned to me. What do you do all day? She asked. Now. Without the shop. I said. Auto repair. PR time enough to pay the bills. Spend the rest of the time here, reading. Thinking. She nodded. It suits you, the quiet, does it? I asked. I think so, she said. You seem settled. Whole, not happy me, but whole. And you? She smiled, a sad, fleeting smile. I'm working on it. One day at a time. Stay rotting with breakfast. I nodded. Good, I said. Keep working on it. She did. Over the next week, she fell into a routine. She woke Eri, made breakfast, cleaned, read, took walks in the woods behind the house. She didn't talk about Chris, didn't talk about Montana, didn't talk about the past, she just existed. Beside me, not with me, but beside me. And I let her, didn't push, didn't pry, didn't offer false hope, just let her be. A present, a reminder. A ghostly running to walk in the sunlight. One evening, a week after she arrived, we were sitting in the living room, me in my chair, her on the couch. The fireplace crackled. Outside, the wind howled. She spoke, her voice really above the wind. I don't love Ben anymore, Mike. I don't think I ever did. Not really. He was a placeholder, a shield, against the loneliness, against the guilt, but he deserved better. He deserved someone whole, not a ghost. I didn't respond, just listened. I don't know if I can ever be whole again, she continued. Chris broke something fundamental, in me, in us, but being here, in this house, with you, it's like the broken pieces are still here, scattered, but they're familiar, and maybe I can learn to live with them, around them, without trying to glue them back together into something that doesn't fit. She looked at me then, her eyes were clear, steady. I'm not asking for a second chance, Mike. I'm not asking for us, I'm just asking to stay, in the brokenness, with you, in the quiet, until I figure out who I am now, if that's okay. I looked back at her. At the woman who'd sacrificed everything based on a lie, who'd survived the lie, who'd traveled 2,000 miles to sit in the ashes of her choices. She wasn't asking for redemption, she was asking for space to exist, to heal, at her own pace. It's okay, I said, stay as long as you need. The house is big enough for ghosts and survivors. She nodded, a single tar. Thank you, she whispered, for the space, for the silence, for not hating me. I don't hate you, I said. I told you that, I meant it. Hatred is too much effort. I'm saving my energy for living, and right now, living means tolerating your presence in my house. That's enough. She smiled, a real smile this time, small. Enough, she echoed. Yes, enough. We lapsed back into silence. The fire popped, the wind gusted, and in the quiet, I realized something. The house wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours, not as husband and wife, but as two people who'd been through the fire and come out the other side, scared but standing, and sometimes, just sometimes, standing together was enough. Enough for now, enough for the broken, enough for the survivors, and maybe, just maybe, enough for a future neither of us could yet imagine. THQI. Winter settled over Elm Street like a heavy blanket. Snow piled against the windowsills, muffling the sounds of the outside world. The house was the furnace humming steadily, the fireplace a constant companion in the evenings. Raw and I fell into a rhythm, unspoken, unforced but consistent. She made breakfast, I made dinner, she cleaned, I maintained the house. We read the silence, occasionally punctuated by the rustle of a newspaper, the turn of a page, the crackle of burning wood. We rarely spoke of the past, we never spoke of the future. We existed in the present, one day at a time. Dave came by occasionally, bringing beer, watching us with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. You two look like monks, he said one night, after Ra had retreated to her room with a book, living in silence, sharing a roof but not a life. It's weird, man, but peaceful. Peaceful is the point, I said, sipping my beer. After the noise Chris made, peace is a luxury. Yeah, but Ra seems better, Dave ventured. Less like a ghost, more solid. She's healing, I said, in her own way, in her own time. I'm not rushing her. I'm not pushing her. I'm just providing the space. Space. You're good at that, Mike, providing space for everyone. Even the people who hurt you. I didn't respond, he was right. I'd provided space for Chris to destroy me. Space for Asra to leave. Space for them both to haunt me. And now, space for Asra to heal. It was my default setting, solitude, distance, non-interference. But as the weeks turned into months, the space began to feel less like a void and more like a vessel holding two separate streams of grief, slowly merging into a murky. She read understanding. We didn't talk about it, but we didn't need to. The silence communicated what words could not. One evening in February, a heavy blizzard trapped us indoors for 3 days. The roads were impassable, the power flickered but held. We spent the time by the fire, reading, dozing, listening to the wind howl. On the third night Esra spoke, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Mike. I looked up from my book. Yet I've been thinking, she said. She was staring into the flames, her face illuminated by the orange glow. About Chris. About the lie. About us. I've been trying to remember. The good parts, not the end, the middle, the beginning. The way you'd hum when you fixed the sink. The way you'd leave your boots by the radiator. The way you'd look at me sometimes, like I was the only person in the room. Were those real? Or were they just rot of the lie too? I considered the question. It was a good one. One I'd asked myself 1,000 times. They were real, I said finally. Chris didn't create those moments. He didn't write the script for my life, he just inserted himself into it, twisted the narrative. But the moments themselves, the humming, the boots, the way I looked at you, those were mine, my feelings, my habits, my love. He couldn't fake that. He could only exploit it. She nodded slowly, processing. The love was real, even if the reason I left wasn't. The love was real, I confirmed. The sacrifice was real. The manipulation was real. But the foundation, that was us, not Chris. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, I miss the humming. I looked at her, really looked. Her profile was sharp against the firelight, her eyes reflecting the flames. I said, sometimes, when I'm working, in the garage. I know, she said, I've heard you, through the walls. It's comforting. Like a piece of the past that didn't get poisoned. Comforting, the word hung in the air. It wasn't love, it wasn't reconciliation, it was comfort. The acknowledgement that something good had survived the wreckage. From that night on, the silence shifted. It wasn't just tolerance, it was companionship. We still didn't talk much, but we shared the space differently. She'd sit closer to the fire, I'd sit in my chair. Sometimes our feet would almost touch. Neither of us moved away in a rush. The thaw began. Patches of brown grass appy red in the yard. The air lost its bite. Esse raste rotted, spending more time outside, walking in the woods, breathing the cold. One afternoon, she came back with a handful of crocuses, the first flowers of spring. She put them in a jelly jar on the kitchen table. They're back, she said, as if stating a miracle. Yeah, I said, they always come back. She looked at me. Do you think people can come back? Like the flowers, not the same, but similar enough to bloom again. I looked at the crocuses, fragile purple, pushing through the dead leaves. I said, if they're given the space, and the time, and the silence to grow. She nodded. Silence, the holy trinity of healing, apparently. I grunted. She smiled, a real smile, not sad, not tentative, just present. Spring turned to summer. Esse rastiered a small giardin in the backyard, tomatoes, basil, zinnias. She tended it daily, her hands in the dirt, her face to the sun. I watched from the porch, sipping coffee. She looked content, not happy, not ecstatic, just at peace with the dirt, the growth, the cycle. One evening in July, we were sitting on the porch, watching the fireflies. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and Roth. Safra spoke, her voice soft. I'm not going back to Montana, Mike. I didn't respond. I'd known that for months. I'm not Ben's wife anymore, she continued. The divorce was finalized in May. I didn't tell you, didn't want it to be a thing, just fact. I'm Sarah Miller again, or just Sarah. I like just Sarah, just us Sarah, I repeated. Yeah, she said, it's enough, for now. Maybe forever, I don't know. But I know I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to hide, I want to stay here, in this house, with the crocuses, and the humming, and the silence, if that's okay. I looked at her. At the woman who'd been a ghost, then a survivor, now just a raw rooted, present, choosing to stay, not out of obligation, not out of love, but out of a quiet acceptance of what was, and what could be. It's okay, I said, the house is big enough. The silence is deep enough. I've gotten used to the company. She smiled, her hand resting on the porch railing, inches from mine. She didn't touch me, didn't try to hold my hand, just let her hand rest there, a bridge between us, a silent acknowledgement. She read space, she read silence, she read survival. I didn't move my hand, didn't pull away, just let it rest there near hers. Two survivors. Two people who'd been through the fire and found, not a phoenix, but a quiet understanding. The fireflies pulsed in the darkness, the crickets chirped, the world turned, and in the quiet of that July evening, on the porch of the house on Elm Street, we sat together, not as husband and wife, lovers, but as two people who'd found a way to coexist in the aftermath, in the quiet. And for now, that was enough. Enough for the crocuses, enough for the humming, enough for the silence, enough for us.